Alright folks, so today we're going to talk about what to look out for when buying a used mountain bike so that you don't end up getting scammed on Facebook Marketplace by some random person. We're going to talk about what to look for on the frame, the suspension, the drivetrain, the brakes, and then other random things here and there that you should keep an eye out for and just go over a little more carefully. And there's no better bike to do that than my Transition Sentinel. Starting out with the frame, what you really want to pay attention to is the areas that are under a lot of stress, and that tends to be the chain stays, the bottom bracket and the down tube here, and you have the suspension linkages, and then you have the head tube here where it connects to the down tube down here. And so what you really want to be looking out for, if you're looking at an aluminum bike, check the welds that run along the frame. You want to make sure that there's no cracks in the welds. Those are usually a point of failure for aluminum mountain bikes. You want to make sure that all of the welds look like they're in good shape and really take the time to get under the bike and look around at every nook and cranny. A lot of times people don't even know that their frames are cracked, and so if you're buying a used bike, you want to make sure you pay attention. As far as carbon bikes, it's pretty much the same, but you also want to pay attention to the linkages here. Sometimes you'll see stress cracks start to propagate from the linkages where the bolts are, down by the suspension here and any sort of pivot point around here. So just pay close attention to that. I also have some in the back right here. You want to look over the chain stays right here and make sure you look underneath to see if there's any damage from rocks or anything like that. On the head tube, you want to make sure there's no cracks around the top, and check the bottoms as well to make sure that there's no cracks. A lot of times if people are nose casing jumps, you'll see cracks down at the bottom that'll propagate through the frame, and then you're out of luck. Moving on to the suspension, what you really want to pay attention to is the stanchions right here. You want to check on, especially the fork at the front. You want to check to make sure that there's no damage on these stanchions, any scratches or dents. The higher they are on the stanchion, the less important it is because it doesn't cycle through as much. But if you run your fingernail through the stanchion and the crack or the dent or the scratch catches your fingernail, then what's happening is it's letting dirt into the lowers of the suspension or the shock body, in this case of the shock, and you're going to end up having a shock that degrades faster and needs more service. It's not the end of the world, but if you're a beginner mountain biker and you're looking to pick up a bike that you don't have to worry about, you're sending it to a shop for service, it's going to add more service time, more money, all of that stuff. As far as trying the suspension out, you want to hop on the bike and you want to cycle the suspension a couple times. Make sure that you're not hearing any weird clunking noises coming from the suspension, as this could be a sign of damaged internals. You want to make sure that there's no squelching noises coming from it, and I know that's really vague, but it kind of sounds like sucking the last of a Slurpee out of a straw from the bottom of a cup. You'll hear that a lot in the rebound of the suspension, and it basically means that there's air in the oil and they're mixing, so some of the seals on the internal side, rebound or compression circuits have faulty parts. And again, that's just going to end up being another service. You're going to end up having to send your shock in and waiting 2 weeks, 3 weeks, depending on how busy they are to get your shock back. Not something you want to deal with. So hop on the bike, jump up and down on it. Swishing is okay. You want to hear a little bit of swishing, that's totally normal. But any clunking and any squelching noises, that's something to look out for. Another thing visually that you want to inspect is make sure that there's no oil seeping out of the seals on the fork and the shock. A lot of times people don't really service their bikes as often as they should, and you'll end up with old seals that are either dried out or worn and they don't seal, and they're going to let the oil from the fork or the shock out. And again, that's just going to be something that you're going to have to send into a shop to replace if you don't know how to do it yourself. One big thing to check for when you're looking at the suspension is to make sure that all of the dials on the suspension work properly. So check the rebound, check the compression settings, lock it out, go all the way slow on the rebound, all the way fast, cycle through them to make sure that they're actually doing something. If you're going all the way slow rebound and you're still getting bucked on the bike, that's a sign that the internals are damaged. And again, you're gonna have to send it in. So take your time and just go through the suspension, make sure that everything works as expected. Okay, now let's move on to the drivetrain. So the drivetrain is gonna be the cranks, the derailleur, the shifter, all that good stuff. And let me show you a prime example of what you don't want to see when you're looking at a used bike. I left this bike sitting out for the winter, and you can see the kinks in the chain here. The bike was stored in the garage, but I clearly did not oil the chain before I stored it for winter. And so this thing is pretty much rock solid. It's not a good sign. So what you want to do is get on the bike and shift through the gears as you're pedaling. Go from the lowest gear to the highest gear and stay in each of those gears for a minute. You want to make sure that the bike is able to keep those gears and not hop off of them. And sometimes what you'll see is that the highest gear or the lowest gear doesn't really want to work. A lot of times this can be fixed with the barrel adjuster on the front of the bike. So the shifter at the top, it has a barrel adjuster that you can turn and adjust the tension of the shifter. Look up how to do this. It takes maybe a couple of minutes tops, and test it out on the bike that you're looking at. Make sure that the barrel adjuster is actually doing something. If the guy is telling you, hey, it just needs to be serviced, there's nothing wrong with the drivetrain, you just need to have it tuned, try the barrel adjuster, look up how to do it. If that doesn't fix it, then you're most likely looking at a bent derailleur hanger, which is on the back of the bike here that hangs the derailleur off of the frame. This is a very common issue with used mountain bikes. The derailleur itself is prone to impact, and the derailleurs can withstand a lot of impact. So you're not going to see damage on that most likely, but what you are going to see is that this piece of aluminum in the back is going to get bent inward or outward depending on the impact, and that's going to affect your shifting. You can find these fairly easily unless you're looking at an older bike, in which case just do a quick Google search, make sure you can actually buy the hanger and it's not some obscure part you're going to have to wait months for. And if that's the case, it's really quick to just take off one bolt and put the new hanger on and put it back on and you're golden. Another thing on the drivetrain you want to check for is that the crank arms spin normally and freely. If you have a damaged or a worn bottom bracket, which is the part that the cranks go through in the frame, they have bearings, they can fail, they can get dirt and water in them, they can rust up. If you have damage to that part, what you're going to see is that the crank arms are going to be hard to turn or they're going to stick somewhere. Another place to check for on the drivetrain is going to be the pedals. I've seen a lot of people, especially newer mountain bikers, cross-thread the pedals on the crank arms. And the crank arms are aluminum, so when they're cross-threaded, you're tearing that thing apart and it can't be fixed easily. So just give these things a wiggle and make sure that they are tight, secure, there's no play in the pedals, and you'll be good. All right, now let's talk about the brakes on the bike. The brakes are fairly simple, so there's not too much that can go wrong with them, and most of the time it's a simple fix if they have issues. But what you want to look for, I'm not going to do it now because I don't have my wheels on the bike, is pull the levers in and make sure the levers don't pull all the way to the bar. If they do pull to the bar, that's typically a sign that there's not enough oil in the system and that they'll need to be bled. So pull those down and make sure that you don't have to pull it all the way down into the grips to get a solid brake going. Now, another thing you want to look for on the brakes is you want to make sure that there's no oil leaking out of either the lever or the actual brake on the bike. So go ahead and just take a look, make sure that there's no oil leakage, it doesn't look wet or shiny. If you pull the triggers, there's no oil oozing out anywhere. All right, now the last thing you want to look for on the brakes is you want to check the rotors themselves. You want to make sure that there is no shiny residue or anything on the rotor. A lot of times if it looks very shiny, if one of them looks shiny and one of them looks matte, that rotor is typically damaged due to overheating. If you brake and there's a loud squeaking noise, it could be contamination in the rotors themselves or the brake pads. These are simple things to fix, but if the rotor is damaged or it's cooked, you will have to replace that, and these things can be kind of expensive depending on the rotors that you choose. So just keep an eye out for that. So now we've covered the frame, the suspension, the drivetrain, and the brakes. The last thing is going over those random miscellaneous parts that you should just give a once over. Starting off with the dropper post, if the bike has one, put the dropper post down, put it up. If it sticks and it doesn't want to pop up or it's really slow to pop up, it could be two things. So a lot of times what happens is that people get a lot of dirt within the seals of the dropper post, and these actually unscrew, so you can unscrew that and pop it up and see. If you have some water or you can spit on it and you cycle it and it gets smoother, that's just a sign of a dirty seal, so you don't have to worry about that. If that doesn't fix the problem and it's still sticking or really slow, look up the brand of the dropper post. A lot of budget bikes are coming with these sealed unit dropper posts, which means you can't service them, you can't add air. The internals are just one unit. And in that case, if the dropper post isn't working, you're gonna need to buy another one. They're not terribly expensive, but it's just not something you wanna deal with, and definitely something you can use to negotiate the price down. So just check the dropper post out and make sure that it's functioning properly. The next thing you wanna check is the headset on the bike. The headset is the part on the head tube that goes on the top and the bottom, and it allows the bars to turn. So just, give the bars a little turn. If the headset is making any sort of noise or it's really stiff, that could be a sign of, again, dirt on the inside and the bearings, rusted bearings, or damage to the headset itself, and not something you want to deal with. So just make sure that the bars are spinning freely. Right now, mine is not, so that's a good example of what it shouldn't look like. And I need to take these apart and clean them, which I will do shortly. Now, the very last thing you should just go over real quick on the bike is going to be the wheel itself, and the rim especially, and the spokes on the wheel. What you want to look for on the rim is you want to look for dents in the rim. If there's large dents in the rim, which are fairly common from hitting rocks on the trail or running really low tire pressures, you could end up having a wheel that does not hold a tubeless tire. And no matter what you do, it's the tire, if you do decide to go tubeless, will not inflate. You want to make sure that there's no dents, and you want to make sure there's no cracks along the rim. And you can also spin the wheel on the bike, just lift it off the ground, spin it. If the wheel is wobbling side to side a lot, it could be a sign that the spokes need to be trued. And truing is just a process to make sure that the wheel is aligned evenly within the hub. So take a look. It's a quick process to get it trued at a shop, and it usually doesn't cost that much. But again, that's something you can use to negotiate the price. And that's pretty much it. So take your time, really go over the bike. You're gonna be riding this thing down, possibly dangerous trails, and you don't wanna have a failure while you're doing that. I'll have a link in the description for a written article on this. It's gonna have a little bit more detail, and I'll include some pictures in that as well. So feel free to check that out. And that's pretty much it. So thank you guys for watching. I hope you guys found this useful, and good luck on your hunt for a bike. It's a great sport to get into, and I'm sure you're gonna have a blast, and you're not gonna regret your decision. So don't overthink it. Just check everything thoroughly, and you're gonna be happy.